Greetings, welcome to Movies Outpost. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to a captivating crime, drama, thriller film from 2009 titled Law-Abiding Citizen. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The film introduces us to Clyde, a skilled tinkerer who is adored by his family. One day, Clyde's daughter follows in his footsteps and creates a beautiful bracelet for him, while also crafting one for her mother. Shortly thereafter, Clyde's wife asks him to answer the door. When he does, he is viciously attacked and subdued by two burglars, who proceed to tie him up and ransack the house. During the home invasion, one of the burglars named Darby heartlessly says that "you can't fight fate" before stabbing Clyde. The other burglar, Rupert, attempts to escape but is quickly silenced. Unfortunately, Clyde is forced to watch in horror as his wife is mercilessly assaulted and murdered by the intruders. Tragically, even his daughter is not spared from this fate. He just lies there, trying his best to scream as he watches helplessly, until he passes out. Nick, a prosecutor that has a 96% success rate, talks with his team about not accepting a case based on it being a probable loss. He is aiming to take his career to the top but is then asked to walk with his colleague. He discusses the Clyde case with him and informs him on some bad news, that last night a judge deemed DNA evidence from the crime scene as inadmissible. As a result, Nick decides he can't take the chance he'll lose, and so he pursues a plea deal instead of going to trial with the case and calls it an imperfect justice system. During their meeting, Clyde hands Nick some notes that he believes could be useful for the case. However, Nick puts the notes aside and informs Clyde that Darby has agreed to testify against Rupert, which will result in Rupert receiving a death sentence. In exchange for his testimony, Darby will face a prison sentence of up to 5 years. Clyde, who is already emotionally traumatized, cannot believe what he is hearing and pleads with Nick to reconsider the deal. Unfortunately, the decision has already been made. Nick explains that the justice system operates based on what can be proven, not what is known. He views the outcome as a victory, which is seen as a disrespectful insult to Clyde. The courtroom proceedings were orchestrated to paint Rupert as the primary offender, while Darby silently mocked Nick's wife and ultimately agreed to the plea bargain. Following the trial, Nick addressed the media about the verdict, and Darby sarcastically expressed his gratitude for Nick's support. Clyde watched the scene unfold as he contemplates justice. After a long day, Nick returned home to his wife Kelly and speaks with his unborn child to make him feel better about the case. 10 years later, Nick's daughter has grown up, but he's still very busy with his work. He had to miss his daughter's school performance again, and his wife Kelly is unhappy that he's not spending enough time with their daughter. On the same day, Rupert is set to be executed by lethal injection, and Nick goes to watch it happen with his colleague Sarah, instead of going to his daughter's performance. When Rupert is executed, he says that he didn't kill Clyde's family, which makes Nick and Sarah feel uncomfortable. But when the injection is given, it doesn't kill Rupert right away, and he screams and shakes in pain and has a horrific death. The warden explains that they are not responsible for the man's agony, that it has never happened before. A policeman arrives and hands the prosecutors a bottle with the phrase, "Can't fight fate" written on it. Nick recognizes this phrase, and the police look into Darby and find his whereabouts. While sniffing flour at Darby's, he receives a call from a muffled voice that reveals personal information about him, causing him to become paranoid. The voice instructs him to look out the window where he sees police approaching from all sides. In a panicked state, Darby fires shots at police cars before receiving another call from the muffled voice. The voice orders him to dispose of his weapon and head towards an abandoned factory to avoid imprisonment. The voice instructs him to a police car with a tasered officer inside asleep. Darby sees the sleeping police officer and takes advantage by taking his weapon and forcing him to drive. After arriving at a deserted location, Darby forces the man to kneel but is interrupted by a call revealing that his rescuer was the officer. After revealing himself as Clyde, Darby attempts to shoot him, but the gun turns out to be a trap, injecting him with a paralyzing serum that leaves him conscious but unable to move. At his warehouse, Clyde restrains Darby and warns him that he will experience excruciating pain that he has never felt before. He is meticulously prepared to prolong Darby's suffering for as long as possible. Prior to initiating the torture, Clyde empathizes with Darby by acknowledging his own helplessness from 10 years ago, stating "You can't fight fate." He starts the recording and proceeds to dismember Darby. Meanwhile, Nick and Sarah are discussing the possible tampering with lethal injection. Nick does not believe Darby is responsible due to his lack of intelligence to carry out such a plan. Later on, Darby is discovered by the police in 25 different pieces. This quite shocking and gruesome scene is relayed to Nick. Sarah comes to the realization that the only person with a possible motive is Clyde. She notes that Clyde has recently liquidated his assets and invested in strange locations, including the warehouse where Darby's remains were found. the police promptly head to Clyde's residence, where he appears unconcerned and undresses calmly as he hears the approaching sirens. Despite his welcoming demeanor, he is taken into custody while giving Nick a mad death stare, warning him what's to come. Upon searching Clyde's house, the police discover books on law and a ripped piece of newspaper with a photograph of Nick and Darby shaking hands. Clyde is placed in an interrogation room at the jail with handcuffs. The authorities believe they do not have any concrete evidence against him and can only hope that he confesses. Meanwhile, Nick's daughter receives a recording that is supposedly her recital and pleads with her mother to watch it, but she says no and tells her that they will watch it together with her father. Despite this, the daughter quietly plays the DVD. She instantly regrets it as it turns out to be footage of Clyde taking his revenge against Darby. Nick approaches Clyde and switches off the live feed before putting on a show of approval, pretending that Clyde has done the right thing. Clyde admits indirectly that he had contemplated murdering both Darby and Rupert and had been repeatedly thinking about ways to carry out the deed. Nick accepts this as Clyde's confession and goes to leave, but Clyde interjects, carefully outlining Nick's daily routine and requesting that he remain seated. Despite Nick's insistence that their interaction is over, Clyde asserts that anything he said is not legally binding since he never explicitly confessed to murder, and he is aware that the authorities lack any evidence. Clyde could potentially claim that the discovery of Darby's corpse in his warehouse was a setup since he owns several properties throughout the country. Nick says they know he did it, but it's not about what you know, it's about what you can prove. Clyde says he will give his full confession if Nick can do something for him. Clyde wants a bed, and Nick's ego gets the better of him as he walks out. Jonas, Nick's supervisor, reprimands him for declining the offer. He believes that getting a confession in exchange for a mattress, especially when there is no supporting evidence, is a no-brainer. However, Nick believes that Clyde is toying with them. Despite Jonas's repeated counsel to take the deal, Clyde eventually acquires the desired mattress, and another inmate has already expressed interest in it. The warden expresses disappointment with Clyde's behavior. During the court proceedings, Nick urges the judge to deny Clyde's request for bail. However, in Clyde's defense, he asserts that he is a law-abiding citizen and that Nick lacks any concrete evidence to justify his continued detention without bail. Nick counters by reminding the court that Clyde had agreed to provide a full confession, which he has failed to do. The judge appears to be swayed by Clyde's argument, and suddenly Clyde begins to applaud. He accuses the judge of being gullible for letting a murderer walk free after saying a few sweet lines. Everyone is shocked by Clyde's outburst, and he continues to berate the judge until she loses it and is escorted out of the courtroom. As a result, the judge denies Clyde's request for bail. In the interrogation room, Clyde says the tape he sent to Nick is good triumphing over evil, and eventually confesses that he is the person featured on the recording. However, Clyde insists that he still has one more admission to make, but he requires a favor in return. Nick is annoyed of hearing Clyde's nonsense, but Clyde persists and demands a medium-rare 20-ounce steak and an iPod during his prison lunch. As Nick is about to depart, Clyde proposes to offer Bill Reynolds' life as his confession. Bill served as Darby's attorney. When Nick returns, Sarah informs him that Bill has been unaccounted for in 3 days. Clyde then speaks directly into the camera and tells Nick that he can secure Bill's survival by fulfilling his requests precisely at 1 p.m. the following day. The following day, the steak is delivered to the prison, as requested. However, 5 minutes before 1 p.m., the warden decides to double-check everything. When they arrive at Clyde's cell, they are 8 minutes late. Clyde maintains his composure and says Bill's location. He also informs them that the 1 p.m. time was intended for Bill, not himself. Nick hurries to a helicopter, and they fly to the location, while Clyde enjoys his steak and music with his cellmate. Despite appearing to become good friends, it is all an act by Clyde, who was only interested in the T-bone from the steak. He increases the volume of the music and hands the controller to the cellmate to distract him before fatally stabbing him over and over. He then lies down on the bed and relaxes as the warden looks inside to an absolute mess. Meanwhile, Nick discovers Bill's lifeless body, buried with an oxygen mask. It took them roughly 15 minutes to arrive at the scene from the prison. Had Clyde received his lunch at exactly 1 p.m., Bill would still be alive. Shortly after, Sarah sends Nick a message notifying him that Clyde has murdered his cellmate and is being relocated to solitary confinement by the warden. Nick goes to visit Clyde in his cell, where he asks about the reason behind his actions and the rationale for taking so many lives. Clyde's response is that he wants everyone to be held responsible for their actions. Nick then offers Clyde his daughter's bracelet and asks whether his family would approve of his actions. He more or less tells him that his revenge is justice. Nick and Jonas have a meeting with a government official who provides them with additional information about Clyde. He describes Clyde as a natural tactician who is capable of orchestrating murders from a distance without physically being present. The fact that Clyde is in prison is intentional, and the cellmate Clyde killed was not chosen at random, but rather a pawn in a larger plan. He advises Nick and Jonas to keep an eye out for the next piece in Clyde's game. He says the only way to stop Clyde is to enter his cell and execute him, as he is targeting anyone involved in his family's case. He warns them that if Clyde wants someone dead, that person is as good as dead. With this information, Nick and Jonas make their way to Judge Laura and pretty much ask her to unintentionally violate Clyde's civil rights and restrict visitation, phone calls, and everything to ensure everyone's safety. She agrees and signs a document. Simultaneously, her cell phone rings, and when she answers it, it blows up. The two men are in shock as the judge is dead on the ground. In the interrogation room at the prison, Nick confronts Clyde about his accomplice and the motivation behind his revenge. Clyde becomes enraged as he feels Nick still does not comprehend the reasoning behind his actions. He asserts that if revenge were his objective, he would have killed Nick's family 10 years ago. Clyde then gives Nick one final chance. Release him before 6 a.m. without any charges, or everyone will suffer the consequences. Subsequently, Clyde is transferred to a maximum security unit, escorted by multiple guards. Nick and Sarah later meet at the prison, where they sift through various documents searching for any insights of who might be assisting Clyde from the outside, but their efforts are in vain. Sarah begins to have doubts about their decision to make a deal with Derby in the past, and Nick reassures her that it was the right choice. The DA's team remains on site until 6 a.m., after which Nick sends everyone home to rest. However, when Sarah starts her car, the explosives attached to the vehicles around detonate. Sarah looks at Nick and her car blows up, resulting in her death. Nick is convinced that someone is assisting Clyde, as he is still incarcerated. The devastating attack claims the lives of 6 officers. Nick and Jonas meet with the mayor, who expresses shock at the amount of destruction one man in custody can cause. In response, she appoints security to Nick and Jonas. Nick sends his family to an undisclosed location, referring to it as a vacation. They are instructed to refrain from using credit cards or mobile phones, anything that could potentially reveal their whereabouts. As Nick returns inside, he discovers a framed newspaper article indicating that someone has been inside his home. Later, at the prison, Clyde is allowed to take a walk and encounters Nick and the detective. In a fit of rage, Nick physically beats Clyde, who tells him that this is only the beginning. The detective draws his weapon, but Nick restrains him. Clyde ominously says that what Nick is about to witness will be of historical proportions. During Sarah's funeral, Jones voices his opinion that they brought this tragedy upon themselves, but Nick remains steadfast in his belief that they made the right decision. However, he is beginning to question himself. As they enter their secured vehicles and depart, a mysterious individual wearing black garments takes control of a military drone equipped with a machine gun, an EMP, and a rocket launcher. The drone targets and disables their vehicles, causing them to come to a halt. The perpetrator fires multiple rounds at Jonas's vehicle, destroying it entirely. In a desperate attempt to eliminate Jonas, he then launches the rocket, completely killing everyone in the vehicle. The mayor is astounded that Nick allowed this to escalate, and she contemplates terminating his employment. However, to alleviate pressure from the media, she promotes Nick to the position of district attorney. Consequently, the mayor issues an emergency order that restricts movement throughout the city. Upon receiving an email from Sarah's contact regarding real estate bought by Clyde, Nick delves into researching properties sold in Philadelphia within the last decade and compares their values. Eventually, he discovers that Clyde is the owner of a small garage located near the prison. Nick meets up with the detective to investigate the garage, and they stumble upon a hole in the floor leading to a tunnel that Clyde dug directly underneath the prison. Shockingly, Clyde had made an entrance into every single cell, revealing that he had planned to kill his cellmate all along. Although the detective checks Clyde's cell, he is nowhere to be found. Under the guise of a janitor, Clyde manages to bypass the security and gain access to City Hall by passing a light checkup. Upon investigation, the detective and Nick discover that Clyde has placed cameras in various locations, including Nick's house. They also find a quote from von Clausewitz that suggests City Hall is the center of gravity in this scenario. Clyde has set up a bomb to kill the mayor, who is scheduled to hold a security meeting soon. Nick and the detective arrive at the scene, but they must proceed with caution to avoid alerting Clyde that they have caught on to his plan. As they search the 5th floor just beneath the conference room, Nick and the detective spot a suitcase that they believe to be the bomb. The bomb squad expert opens the suitcase and warns them that the bomb could be activated by a cell phone and detonate at any moment. Meanwhile, agents who were assigned to monitor Clyde's warehouse notice his arrival and alert Nick. Clyde proceeds to his equipment in the tunnel and observes as the meeting gets underway. He retrieves his cell phone and climbs up to his cell. Inside, Nick startles Clyde and holds him at gunpoint, urging him to do the right thing and surrender. Clyde responds by asking if Nick is here to strike one last deal. Nick realizes that Clyde has been trying to convey a message to him all along and declares that he will not negotiate with murderers. He urges Clyde not to proceed with his plan, reminding him that the decision will haunt him for the rest of his life. Clyde apologizes and dials the number to activate the bomb. Nick departs and clarifies that Clyde's remaining lifetime is about 25 seconds as the detective seals off the tunnel. Before leaving, Nick plants the suitcase containing the bomb under Clyde's bed. He glances at his daughter's bracelet one last time before the explosion engulfs his cell in flames. That's the end. Thank you for watching. I would really like to know in this scenario if you believe there is some sympathy for Clyde's actions or is justice from the courts sufficient. Comment down below to let me know. Thank you.